Welcome to Deciphering Growth, the show that explores mental health from every angle. We bring you conversations with personal opinions, stories, and practical tips. We aim to break down the stigma and help you live your best life. So please sit back and let's dive in. Before we begin, we want to remind our listeners that this podcast represents the opinions of Tiffany Graves, Eric Stone, and the show's guests. The content here should not be used as medical advice. It is for informational purposes only, and please consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions. Views and opinions expressed in the podcast are our own and do not represent that of our places of work. This podcast should not be in any legal capacity whatsoever, including but not limited to establishing a standard of care in a legal sense or as a basis for expert witness testimony. There is no guarantee regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on the podcast. In no way does listening, reading, emailing, or interacting on social media with our content establish a doctor-patient relationship.
All right, we are back.
Yes,
Eric, do you want to introduce our topic today?
of course. I want to just throw a trigger warning that those who have maybe had trauma related to religion or spiritual abuse, or for those uninterested in a podcast that's going to discuss things about religion, spirituality, and some of the harms and abuse and trauma that can come with that, uh, please skip this episode. Just give a little skip, pause here, because we're going to dive in into depth into it. So Tiffany and I obviously are both trauma therapists, and so we're very passionate about walking through people healing from trauma. But one of the things that I think we are both also passionate about is religious trauma. So I just wanted to maybe start off with giving a definition of religious trauma that we will use for the discussion today. Religious trauma occurs when a person's religious experience is stressful, degrading, dangerous, abusive, or damaging. Traumatic religious experiences may harm or threaten to harm someone's physical, emotional, spiritual, sexual, or mental well being. Tiffany, when you hear that definition, anything just kind of sticking out to you?
Yeah, so some of the things that stick out to me, kind of more to elaborate on the religious trauma aspect, like that religious trauma can be caused by strict or authoritarian religious environments, which can lead to like fear, guilt, and shame, which are some of the big major emotions that crop up when thinking and talking about religious trauma. You have doctrines of sin and punishment, excommunication or shunning, conflict between personal beliefs and religious teachings that can really like complicate and complexify like religious trauma and how one experiences religious trauma. Not to
Yeah,
mention like all the anxiety, depression, flashbacks, intrusive thoughts, you know, guilt and shame again. That just comes up from like being in that whirlwind of that type of trauma.
absolutely. And I'll share I am a practicing and grew up in Christianity. So I will speak from that lens discussing some of these things because that is my personal lived experience in a community that I am a part of. I do want to throw out a slight add that this is not a experience that is unique to only Christianity. This would be true for any of the major world religions or even small faith movements or spiritual movements that this can happen. So I just want to make sure if anyone is listening who is also Christian that they are not feeling like this is a bashing of any particular faith. This is just what happens with groups of people and organizations that sometimes things can be traumatic and can be true for lots of different things. So I do maybe want to just get in a little bit into types of trauma a bit so we can maybe a little bit more into it. So a person experiences a trauma. So the trauma, I want to be very specific, could be related to the religion or it may not be related to it at all. So again, just trigger warnings here. So for example, if someone within your religious community uh, physically assaults you, we'll just leave it at that level. That could be a trauma that then leads to being a religious trauma, depending on how something is handled. But it also could be one that is more common for folks, a divorce in the family, or a feeling of family stigma about something. I work a lot with people in recovery and addiction. Sometimes that is some of the trauma that family members and the people in recovery and addiction have experienced. That sense of judgment, the finger wagging, so to speak, the, feeling judged, feeling less than, and feeling rejected by maybe a community that you were a part of. Um,
Yeah.
Tiffany, anything you maybe add as maybe an example of what could be a trauma, whether directly related to religion or indirectly?
Yeah. So directly can be, I think what pops up the most when I think about this is like whenever people are trying to find themselves within the context of a religious space, and that like trauma of like their beliefs being like outcasted or stated they're wrong, and kind of like being traumatized in the sense of their self doesn't feel like it makes sense in the context of their religion, and like dealing with that like split
Mm,
type of trauma can be um can be overwhelming at times, from what I've seen, that people that have that kind of struggle. I think too it can be
yeah.
traumatizing when you're an outsider who is trying to forcibly be put into a religious or spiritual situation that maybe you're not interested in,
Ooh.
but someone like keeps trying to like smother you with that. That in itself can be like, oh my gosh, like this is a lot.
Yeah, no, I think it can feel really challenging to feel, I like that word, maybe more, don't want to say the word coerced, but maybe pushed into a religious experience that maybe you're not wanting to uh, have, but also just like maybe like you thought you wanted a different type of experience and then had certain beliefs and then they changed. This is something I think working with all the clients I work with, this is something that comes up quite a bit, is that their views on maybe something have shifted, or the way they're talking about something, or maybe the way like they see something versus like how they grew up is different, and then that causes a problem depending on like the importance of that topic or the value folks are putting on that as a uh, important thing. So a lot of times I think an example, just to make this actually realistic, there's lots of faith movements going through this, is a view of LGBT plus QIA plus community, and is that something that is fine or something that is a challenge? I want to be very clear. Tiffany and I are very pro LGBTQ plus AI plus um, clients, and that there is nothing wrong with that. I will share that there have been different points in my journey growing up as a person when I was younger that I don't think I really knew what I actually believed on that topic. But to be honest, I also was in a very small bubble, and what was shared around me was not uh, supportive things. Just going to some of those environments, late '90s, early 2000s, Christianity was not known for being uh, I don't know, progressive among many other things. So I will just say personally, I've had friends, family, clients, and just friends all have different experiences with this, where I won't speak any of their names or identify them, but I can say very confidently that they would identify coming out to their family or friends or religious community as a religious trauma, or having to feel like they have to hide it or protect themselves. And if you could just maybe imagine, maybe you're someone who's not religious listening to this. If you grow up thinking that if you are that way, that you're, in some sense, they've been told damn to hell, there's no redemption, any type of thing, that could be a very unhealthy thing, a very unsafe thing to believe or think. And so that it's very unsafe for folks to believe that way if they are in those situations. And so really what is needed is allyship support. So I will just say that I think a lot of folks have become much more open-minded, even if they don't see it as a uh, thing that is okay to be doing. They're not maybe as aggressive or borderline hateful. Understanding, I think, more of mental health. But I do want to open it, Tiffany, just because I do want to give some context of this, because I would say I see a lot of religious trauma within all of the general population, but I see much higher levels within my queer clients and LGBT plus clients, where I see a lot more of that religious trauma if they grew up in a faith movement that is not affirming and supportive.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree with that. I do have some individuals outside of that community that have similar experiences where they get to a point and they recognize, like, oh, like this religious belief system just doesn't jive with me as a person. And it can be really challenging, uh, whether you're in that community or not, to step back and recognize, like, everything that my foundation as a human has been built upon goes against who I want to be, who I feel I actually am. And like that cognitive dissonance can really create a lot of like psychological distortions and uncomfortability and just like symptoms as a whole.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, Tiffany. So, I'm sure we'll have some people that are even going through their own religious traumas right now. I do just want to give a shout out to, I grew up in a smaller faith movement, and I'm no scholar in this, but my family history is really tied to the Church of God Anderson, which is a really small evangelical movement compared to some of the bigger ones. But I would label them as heroes. There are clergy members in Indiana right now who signed a statement that said, basically, they called it Chaga Firm, which basically just said that they have the rights. And these are most of the signers, the original ones, were all ordained ministers. They've gone to seminary. I mean, spent money, years of their life. I think, Tiffany, honestly, as much time as we've spent to become therapists, they've done to become ordained in ministry. And they signed these statements saying that they don't see it as inherently sinful to be queer, and that they should be able to decide for themselves, and the same as their congregants. And there's other things, but this is the gist of it. And the reason I call them heroes is because of that statement. They're licensed in Indiana. The Indiana ministries for this group has been going through and saying, your approval to license, you're being investigated for, violating the rules. And so they've been stripping people of their ordination, which is like their blessing and permission to operate and work their careers and passions and callings. So that, I think, I'm amazed by them. I'm inspired by them, because that is a whole nother level of believing in something when they all knew that those were very likely consequences. So I would label that as also religious trauma. So maybe if you have a view and something like this is occurring and you're having to pay a high cost because of that. I would maybe
Yeah.
throw out another piece of, like, I'm sure there were some people who knew that those were the consequences and didn't feel like they would be able to uh, sign that statement. And I respect that too, because that's also traumatic to feel like, well, what if I can't provide for my family? What can I do? So, not to shame people who did or didn't sign, but I think that would be another type of religious trauma. But I just want to give that shout out, because I think that is traumatic for them, but they were inspired by what the queer community has gone through at the hands of Christianity, and wanting to be a part of healing those wounds and stepping forward. Um, so I'll just go into some other types of trauma here. So trauma can have religious implications. So kind of feeling the pressure, like, to be a part of a community, or even, like, I think the one I'm going to give a shout out to as a couples therapist is this idea that, like, all relationships cannot end no matter what. And you've made this commitment to a marriage and you can't break it. And if you do, you're, black mark type of thing. I don't believe any of this at all. I think a lot of people don't, but this is something that can be rooted. And so just even sometimes it's how scripture is quoted out of context. I'm going to really stay in my lane as a therapist, not clergy. But for example, some people have been in domestic violence situations. They've been in abusive situations, and they have sometimes felt pressured by their church to stay or heal it. And so I'm not judging people who have done work and healed and moved on, but to just blanketly say to all people in those situations to stay, very problematic from a lot of sense. So that is another type of trauma that folks can tend to see. Um, the other one, and I think you see more of this with the Me Too movement, which is not too long ago, is the lack of support or even sometimes denial of reports of abuse. And so, this is not just something specific to any specific faith group, but you could think of like the Catholic Church. You could think of really any situation where abuse has been reported, maybe hidden, and maybe even like in some cases, abusers are protected. And maybe those who are bringing, survivors are being attacked or pressured or told to leave or to be silent. So, I do think a lot of things are moving in the right direction. I do want to just give a shout out to the church I'm a part of. If you're going to volunteer in any capacity around children, you have to do a background check every single year. It doesn't matter if you're the pastor, an elder, you have a kid, you have to do that, and that's an every year thing. And I think the positive of that is that's becoming more and more the norm for those situations to just combat trauma and prevent a lot of unsafe experiences. So I know I nerd out on this, Tiffany. This is something I'm really passionate about. I'm passionate about seeing people heal. The only other one I would throw out there is sometimes this pressure to fit in. And so sometimes people come from different environments, whether they didn't grow up in the church and they come to the church, or maybe they're from a different area of the country, or a different race and ethnicity, or interracial marriage, or you could pick which things. The more marginalized group you are, and you're going to a group that maybe you're still marginalized, that can be a very complicated experience. So I'm not going to white explain that today, but just throwing that out that I think that can be a very challenging and can be related to religious trauma. Tiffany, is there anything else you'd want to add to this one?
Yeah, so as you were talking, you may or may not have seen this documentary Spotlight. That came to mind for me in terms of like really an interesting documentary that kind of like summed up the experiences of some of those religious trauma survivors. So yeah, so if you're wanting to dip your feet in kind of like that world, I would encourage people to watch that movie. It's a really interesting, fascinating documentary on that. Also something I wanted to add, like as we're talking about this, just so that we can hopefully make sure we're not stepping on anyone's toes, is that when we're talking about religious trauma, it can occur on both sides of the religious line. And in general, like the trauma we're talking about refers more to like the personal experiences of each individual person. So not trying to say that you can be in the church and have religious trauma. You can have left the church and have religious trauma. You can not be in a church at all and still have some form of religious trauma, based on like your experiences.
I think that's important. Yeah. So my substance use counselor is coming out because I talk so much about this. Like religion is more formal, organized, and spiritual would be more individual, personal. So when we're talking religion, it usually applies to um, the organized pieces of that. I know sometimes I think the challenge, I know Tiffany and I talk about this a lot, so I always try to give definitions at the beginning, is folks will use different terms to talk about the same thing, or sometimes use the same term to talk about different things. That's why we try to talk about it a little bit. I will just throw out a shout out as well. I have known many clergy members who have completely left the church or left religious organizations or switched denominations because of experiences they have gone through. So I do just want to specify, I don't think religious trauma is unique for congregants or people as a member of the body. It can be also for folks who are leading, sometimes at very high levels. The other thing I would just throw out as an example is it doesn't always have to be sexual abuse, and it also doesn't have to be like theft or things like this. Because I just want to give an example. I like that Tiffany plugged it. There is a documentary about Hillsong Church, and Hillsong Church in Australia, there was some instances where child abuse was not reported and kind of shoved under the rug. But there is a piece of Hillsong New York, and I'm forgetting this pastor's name. He's very trendy, and I'm not trying to disparage him. He has moved on with his life. But the religious trauma that I think ties into that is that he was kind of living a double life, telling people what to do, and he was going on and cheating on his partner that he was married to, while doing other things, saying, "Hey, let's live a certain lifestyle and going." And so the thing I would talk about is the people that he had those affairs with, or maybe were even flirting with, and beyond that, they have their own religious trauma of like, what does that kind of look like? So I just want to give that, because that's no one has defined it as not two consenting individuals, adults, and also that can still be religious trauma for both of them, even though we can talk about power and influence. So again, I know we're not a podcast only on religious trauma, but I find it really fascinating. I think it's something that carries some stigma. And Tiffany, I literally have no doubt some people are going to see that I have posted this and shared this and gone, and some people are not going to come and listen to this because they want to support this. They want to come and listen to this, I think, to see if there's any subtweets or call outs or any of those things. And that's not the goal of this podcast. And if you're listening and that's why you came here, please feel free to reach out to me. Love to talk. And also, it's okay that we've all made mistakes and sometimes we hurt people. Those things happen. But
Yeah, that makes us
it does make
human.
us human. And also, I don't think that's really helpful to call each other out. And in the current world, I think that's not helpful. But I'm just giving a shout out. And it won't be that many people, Tiffany, but I promise you, there'll be people who get to this point and be like, what? But there'll be a few. But I also think, we almost all have some version of this if we grew up around religion. The amount of memes, the amount of family members I'm sending TikToks to, we're going back and forth, we're making jokes and things. Like, I think there's just a lot of this going on, more than maybe even is talked about. And so the goal of this and the goal of our podcast is to kind of challenge stigma and make some of these things more open to talk about. Yeah. So Tiffany, anything, I want to just make sure I'm tagging you in. Anything else you'd like to throw in here?
Yeah. So I do also want us to plug that there is a very big difference between religious trauma and spiritual abuse. As we're talking about this and kind of like working to clarify and talk about some of these concepts. So the definition that I have of spiritual abuse, it's a form of abuse that involves the use of spiritual or religious beliefs to control, manipulate, or harm others. It often occurs within a religious or spiritual context, but can be perpetuated by religious leaders, parents, or other authority figures outside of a religious place of practice.
I love that. I think maybe some signs. I think this will probably be the last thing we'll have time for today, just as we kind of get into stuff with some of the signs of spiritual abuse. So some questions you may ask yourself if you're wanting to think through this. Have you ever had any of your spiritual beliefs or practices used against you to get you to perform certain actions, whatever those may be? Did you have the freedom of choice in how you lived your life, raised your children, interacted with your partner, or were those decisions made by religious leaders? Has a religious leader ever recommended you stay in an abusive or harmful situation in order to grow closer to your God? Has a boss ever limited your ability to work or have opportunity for promotion based on your expressed beliefs, disapproval of a certain faith? Have your religious leaders ever tried to justify domestic violence or protect known abusers? This one's going to get, I think, a lot of people. Has a parent or partner ever tried to force their religion on you? Are you free to practice your faith as you want?
Yeah, all great kind of questions to ask yourself as you're thinking about this.
Yeah. I think the world is getting more connected and a lot of things are changing for the better. And at the same time, institutions can be used to protect religion can be used to protect people in power sometimes because that's what's maybe seen as like a virtue when in reality that could be actually putting a lot of people in harm's way, and be really challenging in a lot of different uh, contexts. I think the other thing that is very interesting, and when we talk about trauma, it doesn't have to be a broken bone. It doesn't have to be a you were physically assaulted or another type of assault, it can literally just be a conversation like the tone, the volume, and the loudness that you and I are talking right now, Tiffany, and that can be, religious trauma, spiritual trauma. It can just be the things said to you, the things that were implied, the way you were left to feel from those things. And so that is something I think sometimes you'll see maybe people who feel poorly about things they've said or done. And so I think they will try to defend their actions, which I think we all would. No one wants to feel like they've messed up. Um, but that's kind of a part of it. Like, I just think about even dumb things I've said in my life or things I've done wrong. And it doesn't mean I'm a terrible person. It just means like, yeah, we all make mistakes and people hurt people. And, there's different layers of that. But this is kind of just that acknowledgement of like, things could have been said to you, things could have been done around you. You could have been put in some positions that were just uncomfortable.
Yeah, yeah. Being able to recognize and normalize that, like, while a large majority of the time it's unintentional, we do fuck up, and fuck ups hurt, but we have the
They do.
ability to control how we want to move forward from those fuck ups.
Yeah. And I think it's there's growth and I think religion and spirituality are really beautiful things. And really beautiful things can also be used to hurt people. And so I think it's just having that mindfulness, that awareness of some of those pieces. And I think this is something I feel like we almost just have to come back to, Tiffany, a bit and kind of maybe get more into like what are the steps to healing from religious trauma? What are like suggestions? What are things maybe you could do if you were pre-therapy or wanting to do in therapy? But I want to sincerely thank each and every person who has listened to this, and we'll get more in that those steps. We'll get more into are more individual. But I just want to maybe say, be open, even if you're not in your spiritual or religious community anymore. Other people want to talk about some of those experiences sometimes, whether it be just joking or laughing. If you spent 15, 20, even a couple years in something, it's a part of your life that maybe something you want to talk about, or maybe something that you've gone through with your family. That's not weird to want to talk about those things. So I just would maybe throw out to anyone who's listening, even if you're not spiritual or religious yourself, holding space for people to talk about those things is very helpful for healing in a non-judgmental way. And the last maybe shout out I would give is people change all the time with different things. And so not wanting to, for people to change their mind, one of the challenges right now in the world is you seem to get punished for why didn't you change your mind sooner or this or that. And so just giving space for that, I think, is really, really important. And so I'll throw it to you, Tiffany, for anything you want to say is just some last thought.
Yeah, no, I think you wrapped it up very well. I think the only thing I'd leave people with is just make sure that you're doing your best to treat others the way that you would want them to treat you, and just be open-minded to hearing out other people's experiences of different things.
Maybe someday, Tiffany, it's not today. I smiled because, like, in my small faith movement, there's this song called The Doxology, and it's how we like bless food, close events and stuff. I'm not gonna do it because I'm not ready. But sorry, I started smiling because it's like tradition, and so it's a really beautiful thing. But just sometimes it's like once it starts, it's like a train; it doesn't stop. And if any of my Church of God people are listening to this, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Appreciate you being here, Tiffany. Appreciate you all listening. And honestly, if anyone has any thoughts or things they'd like us to add for this topic, oh man, it would mean so much to hear how our words maybe resonated with you or things you would add. Just because this is a topic personal to both myself and Tiffany and to people we really care about and work with. So any feedback, we would really appreciate it. Even if you have some things you'd like to politely disagree about, let us know. We welcome that too.
Yeah, and we also welcome you to join our Patreon community. You can have conversations there. You can check out, our rants and other fun things that we're offering to the community.
Yeah, and we plug the Patreon every time because there's a huge collection of free mental health resources there, and we plug all of them. So if any of our guest speakers have stuff that they want to share, all of that is there, so you do not have to pay to get there. It's just the easiest way for us to update and post some things, and there's a few extra things there from us. But we will catch you guys next time, and appreciate you all being here. And we'll look forward to picking up with individual ways of kind of healing religious and spiritual trauma.
Yeah. Bye, guys.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Deciphering Growth. We hope you found our conversation helpful and insightful. Subscribe to our podcast for more episodes and check out our Patreon for more content. Don't hesitate to contact us on social media if you have any questions or comments. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep growing.